Let's breathe together. This month we're talking about expectancy, the key to joy. Expectancy, the key to joy. Expectancy, the big and. Remember? The big and is what expectancy is all about. It's like, as I said last week, it's like walking through our lives on a big Easter egg hunt. That's what expectancy is like, expecting to find something good. Ernest Holmes defined joy as the emotion excited by the expectancy of good. The emotion excited by the expectancy of good. And when we walk through our lives with an expectancy of good, we're always hopeful. We're always excited. We're always anticipating. We're always looking forward to. And that's something that comes from within. That expectancy comes from within. That expectancy comes from within. That joy comes from within. That joy is of God. That joy is of God. God is not joyful. God is joy itself. And so when we connect with joy itself, we're like babies. You know, babies are lit from within. Think about a baby. They're lit from within. That glow just comes from within. They still have that connection. They haven't learned how to cover it over as we have, having been on this plane for so long. And so when we can just let go of all those things that cover it over, that joy can just bubble up and come forth from us. And I gave you an acronym for joy last week: jump into oneness and yield. Jump into oneness and yield. Jump into oneness and yield. J-O-Y, joy. That's what we're talking about this month, joy. And this week the topic is the thousand-stringed instrument. The thousand-stringed instrument. And it's not hard to figure out what that is. Hafiz, the Sufi poet, said that the heart is a thousand-stringed instrument that can only be tuned with love. The heart is a thousand-stringed instrument that can only be tuned with love. Our heart is a thousand-stringed instrument that can only be tuned with love. Without love, we can't have joy. Without love, we can't get to that oneness with God. Without love, we can't experience the allness and the fullness of God. And when we can't experience that, we can't experience joy, because they're all the same. It's all God. And so we're looking at today how we can continue to tune our hearts over and over and over again with love. You know, stringed instruments have to be tuned. They get out of tune according to the humidity, weather patterns, stretching too much. Different things will make string instruments, guitars, violins, violas, whatever the case may be. They will get out of tune because of overuse, stretching, all that. And our hearts get out of tune too, because there are things that happen, things that come up in our lives. There are situations and circumstances that we run into. There are these things that happen as a result of our being human that can make our hearts get out of tune. And so when we can remember to take a step back and to breathe and to move back into that place of oneness and recognize that no matter what the situation or circumstance, no matter what's going on in our lives, no matter what we may name it or how we may label anything, that there's a power and a presence that's in the midst of everything, that there's love in the midst of everything, that there's that all-knowing intelligence that is guiding and directing everything. And when we can connect with that, then we can get back in tune. That's how we tune our hearts up. We tune our hearts by keeping open the door to our hearts. As the reading said, keep open the door to thy heart. Keep open the door of thy heart. Keep open the door of thy heart. And it doesn't matter then how many doors are closed against us. Doesn't matter. You can't stop me from loving you. I can't stop you from loving me. Isn't that awesome? Because unconditional love just is. And when we're just loving and being in that place of loving and being in that place of not allowing anything to block us from loving, anything to keep us from loving, anything to stop us from loving, then that's when our hearts can remain open. And when our hearts can remain open, that's when we get to experience joy. Because that's when we get to really connect with the all that is, to really connect with the source of our being. And so let's look at some ways that we can really tune those heartstrings of ours with love. You know, look at the way that we are interacting in our world, interacting with family, interacting with friends, interacting with ourselves. How are we moving through the world? How are we moving through our lives? How are we moving through this community? How are we moving through our workplace? How are we moving through wherever it is we are? Are we moving through it with a closed heart? Are we moving through it with anger and bitterness? Are we moving through it with criticism and judgment? Are we moving through it with all that stuff? Howard Thurman also calls that stuff the thicket in which our hearts get caught. That's one of my favorite words, thicket. So I like to find a way to use that word when I'm talking about Howard Thurman, the thicket in which our hearts get caught. And our hearts do get caught in thicket over and over and over again. And what we have to do is to remember to release, to let go of all that stuff that our hearts would get caught in. And they get caught without us even knowing it. They get caught. It's just like, I guess, the string on an instrument. There's humidity, and sometimes they don't even know that there's humidity there that affects the tuning of the strings. And so our hearts get caught in stuff just by moving through this world, moving through our lives. And we have to be fully present, fully mindful always of what we're doing, what we're thinking, what we're saying, and how we're moving through the world. And so I invite you today to just look at three things, looking at how we are relating. Let our relationships, number one, let all of our relationships be sacred, recognizing the sacredness of our relationships. All relationships are sacred. All relationships are sacred. If God is all there is, then all relationships are sacred, because God is in you, God is in me, and we are always recognizing that God presence, whether we can see it or not. Sometimes we can't. Sometimes other people can't see it in us. It doesn't mean that it doesn't exist. But when we start to be consciously aware that all relationships are sacred, even with people that we don't know, even with strangers, because so long as we are relating, that's what relationships are about. We're relating to each other in some way. So we have relationships with people that we don't even have relationships with, because we're always relating. The relationship is not relating. The relationship is one of not speaking. The relationship is one of not interacting. And so just recognizing the sacredness in that, thinking about that, recognizing the sacredness in all of our relationships, that means that we are treating everyone with honor, with respect, with honor, with respect, with care. We're treating them with care, with honor, with respect, with our thoughts, with our words, with our actions. That's how we treat all relationships, as though they're sacred. Even those people we don't want to be around, even those people we don't want to interact with, we still treat those relationships as though they're sacred, because they are. And so when we recognize the sacredness of the relationships, then we start to recognize in closer relationships, if you will, the specialness of those relationships that we have. We start to look at how we move through those relationships, how we interact with each other. Are we making false promises in our relationships? Are we saying one thing and doing another? Are we saying one thing and doing another? Are we promising to do something that we know we can't keep because we either overbooked, or we had no intention of doing it in the first place, or we couldn't say no, we didn't know how to say no, we didn't realize that no is a complete sentence? And so instead of saying no, period, sometimes no exclamation point, then we'll say no and then do something with the heart that's closed and resentful and all that stuff that we get caught up in. And so rather than doing that, just really not making false promises, making promises that we intend to keep and that we can keep, and that we make every effort to keep. Of course, there are things that come up that we can't always do what we say we're going to do, but there's a way of honoring that. There's a way of interacting with the other person and letting the other person know that I can't do this, or this doesn't work for me, which is always a good excuse, if you will, a good reason to give someone for not doing something or not agreeing or whatever. This doesn't work for me. That won't work for me. That's as good as no. That doesn't work for me. And so learning to say, that doesn't work for me, rather than making a promise that you know you aren't going to keep or that you can't keep. That doesn't work for me if it's something you don't really want to do. That doesn't work for me if it's something that you're going to do and do it with resentment. And do it with anger and irritation, slamming things and growling as you walk around. Anybody know that one? Yeah. That's not an open-hearted way to move through the world and in that relationship. That's not a way to honor the relationships that we have. That's not a way to treat a relationship as though it's special. And with the specialness that it is. A few years ago, I did a memorial service. I officiated. I officiated a memorial service for a woman whose daughter wanted to have a service in her honor. She had it as a brunch in her mother's home. And it was on her mother's birthday. And she had about, I think there were 30 people there. And they had tables throughout, and we had a meal. It was a wonderful, wonderful celebration. And people spoke about her throughout the time. They would get up and they would say things about her. And what was so interesting was that they all told similar stories. And the thing was, they all thought that they were her best friend. Many of them, most of them didn't know each other. And they came together and they were going to tell these stories about her, and they were going to talk about being her best friend, and they all thought that they were her best friend. Isn't that awesome? They all had similar stories. She laughed with them. She cried with them. They knew that she loved cooking. She cooked for them. She had a beautiful garden. She was known for her cooking and for her garden. They all talked about the beautiful flowers she would bring to them, just for no reason, just because. The meals that she would cook, the special dishes she would make for them. She did that for all of them. And they were all amazed to know that they weren't the only ones. How awesome is that? That really, really, really struck me. That really, really touched my heart. And I thought about, wow, what an awesome way to live our lives. That we can treat everybody like they're our best friend. That we can care about everybody. Of course, there are some people you're going to be closer to than others. Of course, there are some people you tell your innermost secrets to, and others that you don't. That doesn't mean that you treat people in a way that keeps them separate from you. But when we can love each other, and when we can treat each other like we're our best friend, like you're my best friend, I think that is awesome. My father there were 3 of us, daughters, and my father treated us all like we were only children. I loved that because I wanted to be an only child. And I was the only child for 3 years. And then they came along. But honestly, he treated us all like we were his favorite children. Each one of us was his favorite. And that was just wonderful. And so as we walk through our lives, as we interact with each other, let's treat each other as though you're my favorite. You're my absolute favorite. And do you know that comes back to us? Do you know that comes back? We get a chance to experience that specialness in our relationships, and it happens easily and effortlessly. That's how love tunes our hearts. That's how love can tune our hearts. Another thing is to remember to release and let go of self-righteousness. Self-righteousness. I'm right and you're wrong. I know more than you do. I'm morally superior because I don't smoke, I don't drink, I don't, you do. Or whatever the case may be. Any self-righteous behavior that we have, let's let that go. It doesn't serve anything. It serves our ego, but for how long? How long can we walk around feeling self-righteous and have an open heart too, that they're mutually exclusive? We can't do that. So let's let go of the moral superiority. Let's let go of the put-downs. Let's let go of the smugness that we have sometimes about certain things with certain people. And let's just open our hearts, open our minds, take a deep breath, let it all go. It's not that deep. It really isn't. That's what we can do. And the other thing is to use our tongues for healing and uplifting, not for hurt. The gift of speech is to be used for uplifting and blessing, not for demeaning and degrading. Proverbs says something like, the weapon of life and death is the greatest weapon of life and death is the tongue. The greatest weapon of life and death is the tongue. Let's use our tongues for healing, not for hurting. Let's use the gift of speech for uplifting. For uplifting. Who can I uplift today? Who can I uplift today? What can I say that would be uplifting in this situation, even though I may not feel like it? Even though that may not be what I want to do, once we start acting like it is, it becomes so because we can release and let go of that stuff. Is this feeling that I'm having, is this thought that I'm thinking, is this word that I'm speaking one that is representative of the spiritual quality that I want to embrace and to impart right here and right now? And the spiritual quality in this case is love that we're talking about. But joy is also a spiritual quality. How many spiritual qualities can show up right now? It may be forgiveness. It may be just letting go of something that we may have been holding against someone that would have made us speak angrily, that would have made us speak with blame, that may have made us speak in a way that belittles or disparages another. We can take a breath and let that go. Once we decide to forgive it, let it go. I'm going to use my tongue today for healing, not for hurt. I invite you to use your tongue today for healing. Let your gift of speech be uplifting. Let your gift of speech be uplifting. If it can't be, stay quiet. Sometimes we don't have to say anything verbally, but make sure that your thoughts are not thinking those things that you didn't say, because it all works together, you know. It all works together. And so what we want to do is just release it anyway, to let it go, to allow this 1,000-stringed instrument that is our heart to be tuned by love. Allow love to be our marching orders, to allow love to be that which guides us and directs us, to allow love to precede us everywhere we go, to allow love to be that quality, that space in which we walk. There's a Bias Beckwith song that says, I walk in the love of God. And so when we walk in the love of God, our hearts are open. When we are consciously walking in God's love, We can never be outside of God's love. But we want to consciously be in that place of God's love and allow that love to reveal itself in and through and as our very lives. This is how we tune that 1,000-stringed instrument that is our hearts. This is how we get to experience the joy that is God. This is how we get to live a joyful and a joy-filled life. I invite you to do that. And then we can walk through this world with the big and. Because when we walk in love, there's nothing but and. I don't care what the appearances and the challenges may be, there's nothing but and when we're walking in God's love. That I invite you to do. Walk in the love of God. Let's take a breath and turn within for prayer. In this moment, oh, Father, Mother God, how great thou art. How great thou art. How infinite. How wonderful. Every breath I breathe is God. Every breath I breathe is God. One power, one presence, one life, one breath, God. The source of my being, God. That to which I am always connected can never be separate, God. That to which we all are connected, that within which we all live and move and have our being, God. This onlyness that is God is my life and the life of each of us here this day. And so I speak the word for each of us this day, the word of love. Just allowing us to be filled up with love, that healing presence of love. That presence of love that makes all things new. That love that allows us to release the old hurts and the old pain and the old stuff, the thicket in which our hearts get caught. And as we release and let go, we are filled up with God's love. We walk in God's love. We move in God's love. And we shine and allow that love to precede us everywhere we go, to bless everyone with whom we come in contact. And healing happens on every level of our being. And so as I open this circle of prayer, I pause momentarily so that you may speak the names of anyone you'd like held in prayer. You may speak their names silently or loud, but you may speak them now. And so for all those whose names were spoken here this day, I know that God is right where each of them is, blessing and keeping them. This prayer goes out to anyone on this planet needing a prayer this day. I know that God is in the midst of every situation, every circumstance, and that all indeed is well. And so I just say thank you, Father, Mother God, for the word spoken here this day. Thank you for the perfect manifestation of this word. Thank you, infinite presence. Thank you, divine mother. I just allow it to be now. And so it is.